All right, so I'm running low on time, so I'm kind of just gonna try to summarize some of J2AUC's experiences, and also like I identify with him because he had a similar experience. Like he was fired from the New York City school system. I was fired from the charter school before in 2012. You know, my students, you know, were outraged by it. Some of his students were outraged by it. You know, but I was fired because I wanted to, as Mama Maisha said, I like to politicize my students, even in the mathematics classroom. And a lot of people believe in this kind of Eurocentric ideal of compartmentalized education where for this 60 minutes, we only talk about mathematics. For this 60 minutes, we only talk about literature. For this 60 minutes, we talk about history. Well, I think, you know, that doesn't even make sense, right? Everything is related to everything. You know, it's just like the transitive property for mathematics. You know, everything is connected. So we need to be having these conversations about politics in mathematics courses. In fact, mathematics is a type of methodology which can help you to understand, you know, I mean, how is the money being stolen? You know, how did, how do we quantify, you know, the slave trade? You know, all the numbers of people that were brought during the Mayafa. How do we even talk about that? You know, that needs to take place in more math classes. You know, so the education will become much more relevant, far more relevant. You know. So again, I guess I'll just read a couple of quotes from the text from J2AUC, formerly known as Leslie Campbell. He recognized the challenges and contradictions inherent in the school desegregation campaigns in Brooklyn and beyond, and he said, we say, okay, we want integration, but why don't you bust white kids in the Bed-Stuy? Because that wasn't happening, right? And this member, Usi was also a member of the African American Teachers Association. And he stated that only those instructors who identify the community struggle as their own could claim relevance. African American teachers could furnish inner cities with skills and leadership, but they must never enter black neighborhoods as strangers bearing gifts. The African American Teachers Association was staunchly nationalistic and originally a black teacher caucus within the city's United Federation of Teachers, which stressed militant political confrontation. And that's another important conversation too, like that we're gonna have to have some uncomfortable conversations about teachers unions. Because a lot of times teachers unions are against you know, the charter school movement, and that's fine. But when we start, you know, and a lot of, you know, people will say, you know, the teachers unions are on our side, you know, if we believe in public education, but if we believe that we should have independent schools, I think that the same vitriol and the same aggression that they have used against the charter school movement will be directed at people trying to become independent. Because of course that equates to a loss of money for them, and a loss of income and salaries for the teachers that are there. Mainly the white people that come in from the suburbs to teach our students in the hood. You know, I think they, you know, want to save us, I guess. You know. Thank you. All right. So a little bit about his background. Leslie Campbell, born and raised in Brooklyn, born to Robert Campbell and Modesta Milling. Both his parents were organizers. Both his parents were politically active. His mother and his father. His father was an organizer for the Communist parties, both Harlem and Bed-Stuy offices. And he also served as the secretary to the left-wing NYC Councilman Benjamin Davis. He taught his son about the Mau Mau liberation struggle in Kenya. So you see the Pan-African connection. Pan-Africanism has been instilled in him as a child. He was talking about the Mau Mau, Jomo Kenyatta, Oginga Odinga. He's learning about all these things. He's in Brooklyn, so he got kind of like, well, Malcolm, again, another thing Malcolm X talked about. Malcolm X talked about internationalizing the struggle. Like the same struggle in Brooklyn that we're dealing with here, brothers and sisters in Kenya are dealing with the same thing. So it makes sense for us to all be connected and us to be having the same conversation and to look at things in that context and in that light, right? His mother also, well actually before that, his father also taught him about Paul Robeson. So again, talking about geographic exemplar replacement, you know, Paul Robeson was like, I would argue like in terms of status and relevance and popularity, he was the Jay-Z of the 1930s or 1940s. I mean, he was an actor, he was a singer. Before that, he was an attorney, he was a football star. He did all these things, right? But our youth just don't know about Paul Robeson. So perhaps if they knew about Paul Robeson, more than would strive to be Paul Robesons instead of some of the other people that were given by the mainstream, right? His mother, Modesta Milling, she also was very active in mobilizing and organizing black Bed-Stuy parents around demands for more decent public education. He went to Brooklyn Tech in 1952, but later withdrew in part due to isolation among privileged white kids. He later went to LIU's Brooklyn campus. He also played basketball for LIU and majored in history with a minor in education. Then he became a teacher at Junior High School 35 in 1962, where he met a colleague and a comrade, Albert Van. All right? And let me jump around here. At Junior High School 35, Campbell created a curriculum that included classes on African history and the transatlantic slave trade. So I also saw a similarity because when I was at a school, the school that fired me actually, Delaware Valley Charter High School, which is not even open anymore, I noticed my students were being done a disservice because in their African American history course, which was mandated, it was really just a game, it was a joke. There was a white guy in there just writing a bunch of notes on the board. The students just had to come in and copy down the notes, and that's how you would get an A. With no real relevance, no real understanding of, okay, how does what W.E.B. Du Bois was doing 100 years ago, how is that even relevant to your situation in North Philly right now? That's what needs to happen. The connections need to be made, and that wasn't happening. So I created a class called African Americans in Philadelphia. And my students affectionately renamed it Black Philly. And I loved it. They brought in, we were having these conversations, trying to make the connections between what's going on in Philly right now and how it's relevant to, the Black experience and how, this trajectory, how we're continuing on the struggle and, going back to, doing the slave trade. We're talking about slave rebellions. We're talking about Mumia Abu-Jamal. And that was also another reason why I created the course because, again, exemplars. A lot of youth in Philadelphia right now do not even know who Mumia Abu-Jamal was or is, since it was who he is. They don't know. And it's not their fault. They have not been taught and they have not been placed in institutions that are charged with and that want them to know who he is. Because dangerous things can happen if they do know who he is. All right? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna close out. Please feel free to ask questions during that segment of the session. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Dr. Iya Hekaru. She's an African-centered educator, scholar, and cultural activist. She was born and raised and educated through K through her PhD in Philadelphia. So her whole education system has been in Philadelphia all the way up to getting her PhD. She is a survivor dedicated to transmitting strategies for developing and maintaining beneficence in African youth with the intent that they will contribute to the continuation of African legacy. Dr. Iya Ajwa has her own book, and hopefully she has some copies, called Acclaim, Acts to Claim the Minds of African Youth. The book is based on a model she created, which is designed to challenge educators of African youth to 1, expose them to an African worldview, 2, consistently incorporate African value systems, and 3, acknowledge and respect the significance and importance of African-centered knowledge. So Sister Dr. Ajwa has just been an educator and dedicated person for years in Philadelphia, and so we're glad to bring her to the New York area, and hopefully you can get her to come up and do some workshops and things in your schools and your organization. So please welcome Dr. Iya Ajwa. Take a look.
Shoot my shot in 5 minutes. It's all good. Permission from my elders to speak? I should. I want to thank New York chapter NACO, especially Dr. Maisha Goza, she's my doctor, for allowing me to participate and share with you about Acclaim. Acclaim is a model that I created after teaching in Philadelphia schools for 2 plus decades. And I was at a culturally centered school in Philadelphia, and I realized that a lot of the confusion that children and parents were dealing with in terms of the education process at a school that was supposed to be culturally responsive to them was because of the confusion of leadership. So that's why I created Acclaim. And Acclaim stands for African Cultural Consciousness, Leadership, Awareness, Instructional Model. And the subtitle is Act to Claim the Minds of African Youth. Because it used to be a time when, we didn't know a lot about who we were as African people, how fantastic we were, how global we were, how we are everywhere on this planet, right? Including Russia, Georgia, okay? Georgia, Russia, so we're everywhere. So, but now that we have that information, what are we doing with it? What are we doing with it? And so that's the subtitle, Act to Claim the Minds of African Youth. Because